Making an offer on a property can be both exciting and scary, and today we're going to run through some of the crazy mistakes buyers make with offers.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to get it right.
I'm Megan and that was Veronica. We're both buyers agents and probably old enough to be your mums. But that's a good thing because between us we've got over 40 years experience and we are going to share with you bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together, we're going to make sure that you get unbiased and real information that you can rely on so you can get where you want to be without missing a step.
Now, we've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au. There you'll find free checklists that you can download, a free mini course on how to price a property, and our Where to Buy workshop for only $39. Priceless stuff, really.
Bargain. But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, here's the boring bit, the disclaimer. You, of course, know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field of expertise. Now, we've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording, but things change. So check with the relevant government authority or your advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
Today we're talking about making offers, and we'll run through a whole bunch of silly things that we see buyers do. Common mistakes that really can be avoided once you know better. But before we get into that, there's a crazy house behind you in the video this week, Megan. What the hell is that?
Well, you know, I always go for houses, real houses that people either live in or, you know, they're showpieces. This just seems to suit the theme, don't you think? This is just an amusement ride and I loved it. It made me laugh. I'd love to go on it.
You would. I hate rides for starters.
I love them.
That just looks like the ride from hell. Oh. Okay, tune into the video.
Can you see the people in there going, let me out.
Let me out. Hotel California, you can check out. You can never leave. On to the serious, crazy things.
We often hear buyers say that they don't know how much to offer on a property, but what we don't often hear them say is they don't know how to make an offer. And this is so important. And it's one of those things, Veronica, you don't know what you don't know. You think, oh, that's all right. I'll just come up with a price and I'll tell the agent what I'm prepared to pay. And then he'll come back and say, that's great. You've been accepted. Doesn't quite work that way.
It doesn't. It's the how that actually gets so many buyers unstuck during the offer process.
And it's different in every state. As we say in the course, it's different in every state.
And the method of sale. So different agents as well. They're so varied. So we're going to run through some of the crazy things that we have seen buyers do over our many years in real estate. And also you've got to remember that both Megan and I have been sales agents in our early careers, or early real estate careers anyway. So
and we also talk to a lot of agents, right? So I don't know how many times I've spoken to an agent after a multiple offer or an auction campaign and just heard the funny anecdotal stuff that they tell us that people have done and how much it's kind of made them laugh or raise their eyebrows in disbelief.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've told the story about how I bought my first property and I remember making the offer and then just, I don't know, just not knowing what to do
just
afterwards.
Waiting.
And the agent called me and, well, what are you going to do next? And I'm like, well, I don't know. You tell me. It was like, how dangerous. You know, one of the things that a lot of buyers do, they think they've got to gather all this intelligence, all this information. They ask all these questions. You know, there's a lot of dumb questions that buyers ask. That all
there's
seem
some
like
good questions too, but
there's some great questions you should ask, but there's a lot of dumb questions that buyers do ask. And agents sort of have all these standard answers for all the standard questions. And you know what? In a lot of I've read it in blogs, I've heard it on podcasts. You know, one of the questions you should always ask as a buyer, don't take it from us, take it from all these other places that really aren't that reliable, is ask the agent why the owner is selling. You know, it's like, yeah, sure, ask, but like, can you really rely on the answer? I mean, and then
what are you going to do with the information? I mean, how many times have we said that? Can you rely on the answer that you get, which is going to be a scripted answer if they're a good agent?
Yeah.
And then what are you going to do with the information after you get it? Oh,
yeah. And then the big mistake is the crazy thing here is that they believe it. and they just act as if that's the truth, and it isn't quite often.
But then, they say, they want to be closer to the grandchildren.
Yep.
Well, where do the grandchildren live? Oh, just around the corner. Oh, so what is it about this house that isn't as good as being around the corner? Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes the first question, crazy to ask a question and then not know what to do with the information.
Yes. So, and that sort of leads into what a lot of buyers do when they make offers. They sort of create this story around the vendor situation that it's actually not even true. Like how many times I'm just as I'm talking, I'm thinking of all these examples, people that sort of come to me and say, right, well, I'm going to go and bid at auction. And I've already worked out that was it the owner. So the husband, he's actually, he's got a partner suing him in his law firm, and the wife, she's not really happy about that. And so they're really embarrassed. And so they're going to move to a completely different suburb to get away from all the embarrassment. And you go, where did that idea even come from? Like I've heard crazy things like that. And it's like they've made up this entire scenario in their head. And it's like, and even like if you go into auction. So it sounds like
there could be a bargain there, Veronica.
Yeah.
That's sounding like an agent has helped them to think that there is a bargain in the wings to be had.
And instead, what they're not focusing on is that there's 10 other buyers interested in it. Who cares what the vendor's motivation is?
It just means that there's a high potential it will be sold on the day because the reserve might be okay, but that's not to say the other bidders won't see great value over and above what you're prepared to pay.
That's exactly right. It's like that old thing, deceased estate. Remember that sort of, is it the real sort of myth around?
There are actual buyer's agents who are the ambulance chasers who are out there advertising that their methodology is to go for distressed sales.
I know, that's just so rotten. On so many levels.
On so many levels. But it also doesn't mean that what you're getting is a good quality property either.
No. And also, even if it is distressed, if it's good, people will still fight over it. So it doesn't actually matter. And look, the thing too, but when I was first in sales, that thing about, if you put deceased estate on an ad, then it's always going to get more buyers because all buyers think it has to be sold. So therefore there's going to be a bargain. And so the actual correlation to deceased estate and not a bargain, there was a very strong correlation.
Yeah, that's right. So the value proposition is actually getting worse and worse when you put the deceased estate, or you think that there's some sort of distress involved in the sale. It simply means that there is a price at which those people would accept that is lower than they might have were they not under duress. And remember, market value or market price is actually defined as what a willing buyer and a willing seller will agree to in a normal market when neither is under duress. So if one is under duress, it simply means that they would potentially sell at a lower price, but it doesn't mean that everyone else isn't prepared to pay more than that lower price to get in where it's a tight market with not a lot of stock and a lot of buyers out there.
Exactly. So that's one of the crazy
things. It's like
things.
A beacon, isn't it? Like it's like a some sort of attraction magnet.
Come to mama.
Come to the bargain. Oh, hang on, it's not a bargain.
Yeah, I got sucked into that one. And another thing that, we often hear buyers say is that they make an offer and they think it has to be really low. You've got to make a really low offer. And it's like, well, sometimes
where does that advice often come from, Veronica?
Well, yeah, the dad.
It does.
Yeah.
Now, that was completely unscripted, let me tell you. But that is often the dad that says you really need to go in low.
You got to go in low. You've got
to give yourself plenty of room to move.
Yes. And look, sometimes it is a good idea, but it depends on a whole bunch of other things. And often when you go in too low, all you do is insult, you annoy the agent, you insult the owner. Like you actually do more damage than good half the time when you go with a low offer.
Yeah, particularly if that offer's nowhere near where they're going to sell it. It doesn't matter how much under duress they are. If it is anything above a normal market, so there's an equity in supply and demand, then you're shooting yourself in the foot. You're actually on the back. They're going to countersign. If it's a private treaty and you make a really low ball offer, they're going to countersign at a much higher price than they're prepared to sell for, simply to say, no.
But that's if they
like, you go low, I'm going to go high, and then you're further apart than you could have been.
That's true. Although sometimes you get no counter offer.
True.
And then they're like the buyer's head spinning, going, what do I do now? What do I do? What do I do? So they often.
And Dad sits in the background going, don't be the next one to make the move.
Yeah. Or don't bid against yourself, son. So crazy things buyers do. Listen to their dads. That's really crazy. But, so sometimes.
And Dad has bought one house in his life, by the way.
Yeah.
And it was in 1976.
Just because they own a house does not make them an expert.
Actually, on that, the other thing that is really, really important, we talk about cutting out the noise and only listening to the people who are experts in their field and so forth when you're building a team. Dad's not part of your team. But the other thing is to think that because somebody is really successful in business, that they could be quite successful in helping you in a negotiation. And one thing that really hit home to me many, many, many years ago when a managing partner of a law firm came to me and said, Megan, I've found this house and want you to negotiate it for me. I said, tell me, you negotiate, billion-dollar contracts. What is it that you think I bring to the table that you can't do? And this is years ago, Veronica. And he said, this is about people and emotions. I don't do people and emotions. All I'm going to do is annoy them if I try and do this myself. So actually separating your business mind from a negotiation is quite important. So, get the lawyer there and they're going to have a very different negotiation style.
Great self-awareness though.
Yeah. Yes,
fantastic
absolutely.
Self-awareness. Yeah. And also you think about it, I often actually do equate what we do to what lawyers do. You see it on those courtroom dramas and the lawyers will go out the back and they'll actually do a deal often, in a corporate litigation. They might do a deal or negotiate a deal before they actually get into the courtroom. And it's because they don't have emotion about it. And it's a bit like when the buyer's agent and the sales agent negotiates, it's a little bit like having those two professionals negotiate the best deal for you because, they're not emotional about it. So
but
there's some synergies there.
Are.
Oh God, yes.
Right. So
the decision makers,
understanding the emotional context of the decision makers, which is the seller and the buyer, and then being able to have that professional negotiation, having those things, those factors in mind, that makes, I guess, puts that skill where it sits with us.
Yeah.
Rather than a lawyer.
Which is why agents, they love negotiating with buyers because let's face it, you're out of depth. The agent is dealing with this sort of thing every single day. They can read your emotions probably better than you can read your own. A good one, that is. I mean, they're not all that good, but, a good one. And they're also not emotional unless they're a starving agent and they're desperate for a sale because they're basically broke. Yeah.
And there's a lot of those out there. And if they can put a deal together, they'll put it together at any cost. But the flip side of this, Veronica, one of those funny things, crazy things we hear and see buyers do is actually going in too high.
Yeah, I know.
So it's the flip side. You lowball and you think you might get a bargain, but if you go in too high, there's a risk that if you don't present it in the right way or you don't have the right wording around it, that the agent goes, oh, I'm on to a winner. I've still got more than I can squeeze out of this orange. And that's what they'll do. They'll go for it and they will squeeze and squeeze and squeeze, because if you go too high initially without context, and when I say context, sometimes going high is the right strategy, but it's got to be with a lot of context around it to essentially say,
this is how we're going to.
Yeah, but you can't do a take it or leave it offer if you don't know how to word that properly.
No, and also people do take it or leave it offer, and then they
increase, yes. And then the agent goes, "Oh, I've got another 3 or 4 goes at you."
And we hear these stories.
This is it. There's no more. And then the agent comes back and goes, "If you give me another 5, we might get there."
And we're laughing and we feel very sad for buyers who fall into these traps, but they are funny stories when you're on the professional side of this, because it's like a lot of these people.
We're telling the stories so that other people learn, so that they don't make the same mistakes.
Exactly right. So you can save yourself. But there's these buyers that go in there and they're going, right, that's it. My offer expires at 5 o'clock, and then at 6 o'clock, then what are you going to do?
Yeah, and the owners don't finish work until 5:30.
Yeah, they haven't set it up. They haven't actually worked out the logistics or the rules of engagement, or even got the agent on side to actually to actually be confident that you can deliver on such an offer. And so these are the sort of crazy, and also one of the big crazy things I think is because they're in a vacuum. It goes back to that person, the type of buyer that sort of invents this whole scenario around the vendor's circumstances and sort of forgets that they're not the only buyer in the mix. Or sometimes they might be the only buyer as well. And, you know, that comes back to you going in too high. Sometimes you go in too high, total absence of any other buyers. And then all of a sudden it's accepted. Oh, that was a bit too easy.
Oh, gosh. And then buyer's remorse kicks in. Oh, I wonder if I should have. Oh, yeah.
Well, and agents know that too. Let's face it. So, you know, once again, an agent, it comes back to you and they're going to be careful that you don't think, oh, that was too easy, because you might back out. You know?
True. If it's non-binding offer.
Yeah. They're totally aware of all this sort of stuff. So these are all sort of lots of crazy things. Another thing I see a lot, particularly with auction campaigns, is that they go in too early. You know, they don't realise that there's a sort of a sweet spot in an auction campaign, and there's like, it might work, and even that might work 8 times out of 10, but it's not going to work the other 20% of times.
Actually, you go into that a lot in your book, and I think that's a really important point, because you know, there aren't a lot of auctions done in, say, Perth or Brisbane, but a lot in Sydney and Melbourne, and certainly not a lot regionally. And if you are, you know, lining up for a property and you get that timing wrong, you can either miss out because you've gone too late, or be one of the educators of setting the reserve. And that's an important part of the process too. And you know, we go into that in the course, of course, but that is such an important part to read in your book, is when to make an early offer. And there can be circumstances when it works.
Yeah, and plenty when it doesn't. There's a lot of buyers that will do it out of fear. They think, oh, I want to avoid the auction. It's like, well, actually, there are certain times that an auction is better for a buyer than other times. So it's knowing, and each circumstance is different. You know, we have these podcast episodes. We chat and chew the fat and share some of these funny stories. But it has to be a process you go through to narrow it down and decide, you know, what is the right way forward this time. And if you nail it once, and here's another thing that I come across with buyers, I'm sure you do too, if they've bought 1 or 2 properties previously in their lives, they go, well, it worked for me that time, I'm going to do the same thing. It's like, well, it doesn't actually work every time.
Different time, you know, different circumstance, different sellers, different agent, different buyers in the marketplace, even going from one auction to another. You know, you could have been quite close on one auction and think, yep, all right, well, I'm going to just tweak that strategy that I used. You know, you and I have a toolkit of strategies and different dialogue and different ways that we approach things, depending on what type of property it is, what's the demographic of the buyer, what's the agent like, and what's their process, what can we find out about the owner. Probably the smaller part of the picture often in auctions.
Even the auctioneer.
The auctioneer is important. Yeah. The way that they negotiate off the floor if the reserve hasn't been reached, and what sort of strategy should you use during that negotiation?
How realistic is the vendor's expectation? Because there's times when negotiating under the hammer is beneficial to the buyer, times when passing it in is beneficial to the buyer. All of these different scenarios, and most people go to an auction, they've got no idea. I was talking to this couple the other day, and they'd been to their first ever auction together. They've got their 3rd child, just a baby that was like 2 weeks old at the time. They're driving to the auction. They said that's when they were deciding what they should pay, and they didn't buy it. There was only one other bidder, and that bidder made one bid, and they ended up negotiating afterwards, but they didn't negotiate. Actually, that other bidder bought it at their highest bid, right? Ooh. And so when they found that out, they go, oh, we should have stayed there. We could have hung out and continued to negotiate. I'm like, even that's insane, because it's like, well, if you were prepared to pay more than that highest bidder, then why didn't you make a bid at the time? That's a crazy thing that a buyer has done.
That's such a good example, Veronica. People who go to auctions, and we haven't actually got this on our little list, but let's bring it in now. People who go to auctions in a position to bid, they've worked out what they're prepared to pay, they've done their due diligence on the property, and they don't bid.
Yep, they don't bid, or they clam up or whatever.
It does not make any sense whatsoever. And the old dad in the background going, don't show you, keep your cards close to your chest, don't show your hand.
I just thought of another crazy thing.
Such bad advice, because what you're doing is you're actually potentially opening up that negotiation to other buyers after the auction who may have to be conditional on other things. Now we're talking about areas where you can be conditional, but you're actually potentially opening up a bigger buyer pool in that case.
Yeah. I mean, but just think in this instance, right? If they just bid 1,000 more or 5,000 more, they would have been the highest bidder, and they would have bought it.
If you're still inside your limit, read the book. If you're still inside the limit, there are things you must do.
But I think that, because people don't think of all the things that they need to think of before they go to auction or before they make an offer, that's when they do crazy things, because it's like their head starts spinning when something doesn't play out exactly the way they think it should play out. Like the agent doesn't come back and with the counter offer at the amount they imagined or to accept it or whatever. And it's like, well, what do I do now? Oh,
haven't got the contingencies.
Yes. One of the other things I see, really crazy things, buyers get stubborn. They dig their heels in. They sort of dig themselves into a corner, and then it's like, okay, now what are you going to do? If you actually want to buy this property, you have to engage with the buyer, with the agent.
And making demands, and this can be a little bit market dependent as well, but making demands, and you mentioned it earlier, if you impose a deadline, or if you say this is my final offer and I will walk away, and it's not, and it sells to somebody else, because you've said, and multiple offers is a really big part of this. If you keep your cards too close to your chest in a really hot market, you may just be swept aside by the agent who goes, all right, well, you're out, move on to the next one. Actually, demands can be effective in the right situation with the right set of circumstances, but where there's lots of other people and there could be, someone come in with a, oh, I really like this, tell me what offers, and they're more engaging and they're more prepared to be part of the process, then you may well be swept aside if you become so stubborn that no one wants to deal with you.
You become unpopular. And then the agents tar you with that brush.
Yeah,
they know you.
The next time you go to an open house and you walk in and you might be finance ready and you can afford it and everything, and they're just potentially going to look at you and go,
tie kicker, time waster. And they do, absolutely do.
Absolutely do. Well, it's human nature, isn't it? You deal with people who, you don't have to be everyone's friend, but if there's a level of mutual respect there and an ease of doing business, then people are more likely to do business with you.
Oh, God, yeah. Now, one thing that an agent was telling me about very recently, he had a few different offers on the go, so it was a multiple offer situation. And of course, you got to remember, when you're a buyer, you've got no idea what's going on. You don't know whether the agent's telling you the truth or not, but the agents don't always know when the buyer's telling the truth. And sometimes the buyer doesn't know what they don't know, back to what we're always talking about here. And so this particular situation, he was like ropeable because it was competitive and they got the highest price out of the buyer. And he went, right, now I need you to deliver me that signed contract, and in New South Wales, a 66W certificate to waive the cooling off period and your deposit check or transfer the funds or however you're going to pay your deposit. And the buyer then went, what do you mean unconditional? What do you mean 66W? So
completely unprepared.
Yeah, partly that could be the agent maybe didn't coach them well enough, although I know this agent, I would have assumed this agent knows what they're doing. He was like, they weren't even ready. They told me they were ready. They obviously didn't understand what I meant when I said all this stuff. They hadn't even had their contract review. I asked them about this and they went, oh, no, we don't need to worry about that, whatever. They just didn't know what they want. They didn't know. And then the agents got egg on their face. So this is something that, no wonder sometimes agents hate buyers, and quite often, in fact, agents hate buyers.
And that's the point, isn't it? Because if you're entering into a negotiation of such substantial amounts of money with such big impacts on multiple people's lives, we're talking about a seller, an agent, a buyer, and
other buyers that are missing out.
And other buyers that are missing out, exactly. And you haven't actually got yourself into a position, there is a risk that agent may lose those other buyers if they tie a property up to you in a process, which then puts them in a very, very difficult situation with the seller. So if an agent loses a buyer based on something, another buyer that actually could have transacted, because of something that you've done. Oh, wow. Well, if there's no legal recourse, geez, it could be tough out there in the marketplace for you.
Yeah, I mean, this is a good example of why some agents would prefer to go to auction, because this is a situation where they could have burnt all the other buyers or angry and annoyed or whatever. And in the end, I can't even remember what happened, to be honest. So I just remember when I was speaking to him, he was just like, this is what I love dealing with. Buyer's agents, it would never happen. He was fuming, and quite rightly so. I would have been fuming if I was him as well. So that's a really crazy thing. And in fact,
I want to go back to one point that you said then, Veronica, and that was, I would have assumed that the agent had coached them through. I think it's really important that buyers don't assume that agents will coach them through this process, because it's actually not the agent's job. It's actually the buyer's job to know what they need to do, when they need to do it, who they need to involve, what point they need to get to. They are in their rights to assume that if they say it has to be an unconditional offer and I need a 66W, you need to scurry off and find out what that means.
Yes.
You either need to do the course, you need to engage a buyer's agent, you need to speak to a solicitor, whatever you need to do to understand what it is to make an offer that's unconditional in that case, or binding. It is your job to do it for yourself, not to rely on an agent to tell you what to do and how to do it, because they're not representing you.
No. So look, they'll do their job in the way that they want to line up as many buyers as possible and actually get the possible best price for their client. But at the end of the day, like Megan's saying, it's not their responsibility. It is yours. Which is why we created the course, because we fully believe that buyers have a responsibility to arm yourself and know what you are getting yourself in for.
Mm-hmm.
And
it also
on
means
that,
you understand the dialogue that you're engaging in.
This is what I was about to say. Those agents have got certain ways of saying things, certain ways of framing stuff. And if you actually deal with them often enough, you will actually start to learn which ones say the same things every single time. Like
and
robots.
What it may mean.
Yes. But, one of the things that they will often give you a bit of dialogue that will actually knock you off your perch a little bit. So you might have put your offer in, and they'll say, all right, well, that's fine. Thanks for your offer of 500,000. So if I get an offer of 520 from someone, should I keep you posted? And then all of a sudden you go, oh, how am I going to answer that? If I say yes, keep me posted, then I've got a 520. And if I say
there's a 520 in your pocket.
And if I say don't, then they won't. You know what I mean? It's a
and
really,
then you might miss out if you're prepared to pay 520.
Yes. So being prepared for that dialogue is really, really, really important, because they're very, some of them, not all of them, but the ones that are very well trained are very good at hitting you with something that you feel compelled to answer. And if you're caught off guard, you often will give away way more than you really intended to.
Yeah. Or on the worst case scenario, miss out on something that you actually could have and would have bought.
Yes.
So it is a really tricky, fine line to be able to listen. And the more agents you talk to, the more you hear this script and dialogue, and it is very script and dialogue with the best agents. They really know what questions to ask, what they're looking for in your answers. And if you can arm yourself with your own script and dialogue, and this is a lot, we talk about this in the course, then you have answers to these questions that don't reveal too much, but actually don't cut you out of the process.
Yeah, that's a real challenge, isn't it? It's very important. So making an offer, as I think we've sort of demonstrated today, is never as simple as knowing just what the property is worth, although obviously that's a very important first step. You must arm yourself with the right information and then follow a process, which of course is something that we do teach in your first time buyer guide. So we obviously recommend that you do the course so that you can learn that process, because I think, if this conversation hasn't revealed anything, it has revealed anything. I mean, the biggest thing I think it should show you is the variability of things that can happen and how you need to be prepared for all different types of responses.
And it's not just a one size fits all. It is really about having a toolkit of responses and directions, and the famous 2020 word of tilt as something comes your way that you weren't expecting. It is so true. You have to have that toolkit. In this episode, we've covered a very small part of our 10-step online course for first-time buyers. If you would like to learn more about the process and how to buy without making a mistake, then head over to our website, www.homebuyeracademy.com.au. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you like what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. 5 stars would be wonderful. It will help others find us as well.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with some more priceless stuff.